In this lesson, we're going to take a look at logical access. Now, logical access controls are your primary means that are used to be able to manage and protect your information assets. And these controls can enact and substantiate your management's design policies and the procedures that are in place to protect assets. As an auditor, we need to understand the relationship and to be able to analyze and evaluate the effectiveness of those logical access controls. Now, as we take a look at the exposures that we might have to these different types of attacks or issues we have to look at, the technical ones are the type that exist from like an accidental or intentional exploitation of a logical access control. Often these are just going to be unauthorized activities that interfere with normal processing. Examples could be data leakage, wiretapping, computers being shut down. Right? These are things, again, that, they could have been accidental. You could have just shut down the computer when you shouldn't have. It was a server. Wiretapping, a little harder for me to think that's accidental. But you get the idea, right, that there are events that could occur, accidentally or intentionally, that we ought to be taking a look at. As auditors, we should effectively assess the logical access controls within our organizations and then proceed to gain a tactical and organizational understanding of the network. The goal is to determine which areas, at least from a risk standpoint, warrant auditing attention and planning for current and future work. Let's take a look at the paths we have for logical access. So access, or what you might call points of entry, can be gained by several different avenues. I mean, there's many ways you can do that. One could be just directly, as in the case of a PC terminal connecting to a mainframe. Another form of access may be through the LAN, using a common linking structure and the existing trust relationships. In other words, I'm in the building, I'm in the LAN, I'm on the PC, and we might not have a lot of the worries like we do from traffic from the outside. In fact, very often, or I should say very seldomly, do I have a firewall protecting my PC from getting to my print server. The use of security doors among the various environments, which may need to cross a low security or even open IT spaces like the internet. A front-end system, which are network-based, connecting an organization to the outside untrusted network. All of those are ways we could try to get in or might see as places where people can enter into the network, and we want to take a look at those. Points of entry to the user front-end or back-end systems can control accesses from an organization's networking or telecommunications infrastructure into their information resources. The general modes of access could be network connectivity or other types of remote access. Computer systems can store large quantities of sensitive information and increase the capability of being able to share from one system to another. And all of these factors have made resources more widely and promptly accessible and available. So to protect an organization's information resources, we do that with access controls at all layers of the organization's IS architecture. Now, some of the general controls that you might see might be to do things like create or change user profiles, to assign user identification and authentication, having user logon limit rules, a banner message, logging their activities of what they're doing so we can keep track of it, at least historically. Identification is defined as providing the credentials to prove one's identity, where authentication is the validation of those credentials. Now, there are some common vulnerabilities that can be used to gain unauthorized access, like having weak authentication methods. Now, a weak authentication method could simply just be having to type in, one simple password and not even a username. Or it might be that we are not using strong passwords, what we might call complex. We can also find ways to bypass authentication as well. We also have to worry about some other weaknesses, like the lack of confidentiality and integrity for stored, authenticated information. In the early days of Linux, as an example, the users and their passwords were stored in a file called password. And none of it was encrypted, so it was easy to get to. If you could find a way to download that file or lift it off that hard drive, you knew everything you needed to get in. We also have to look at the lack of encryption for identification transmissions over the network. Again, if I'm going to send my username and password, if I encrypt it, I don't have to worry about anybody eavesdropping and gathering that information. And of course, the lack of user knowledge about social engineering. I've told the story many times about being in a cell phone shop, and their computers were down, so I couldn't buy a cell phone. I was waiting for the contractor to come in. Contractor came in and yelled across the room, "Hey, what's the manager's password?" And the person who was not the manager even knew what it was, but yelled it out loud back to them. I mean, these are just things that people should know about. And, social engineering is more my asking the password and you actually giving it to me. But it's a part of those things that are vulnerabilities that people can use to get this unauthorized access. Authentication can be categorized in three different ways: as something you know, something you have, and something you are. Now, something you know, I think that's easy because we do that all the time. It's your username and password. The something you have can be like a smart card. It could be an access token. There's several different varieties of those where you have synchronous and asynchronous types of tokens. The something you are gets us into the biometrics. It can also be something you do, like a signature analysis as well, or a voice print. But generally, we look at that as a biometric option. Now, if I use more than one combination of these, it creates a more secure authentication, sometimes known as a two-factor authentication. And the reason that's important is if you think about it, if it's my username and password, and I was at that cell shop and I now know the manager's username and password after I heard it yelled across the room, I would still not be able to log in if I must also have had some sort of smart card or access token, or if I had to go through a thumbprint or fingerprint scanner. Wouldn't have been able to get in even though I knew part of what I needed. Now, passwords are things that should be easy to remember, but difficult for an attacker to derive. And I know that almost seems like a conflict of terms. But it should be. It can be any combination, we know, of uppercase, lowercase, numeric values, and special characters. And I use the example of a lot of Microsoft training classes. Use a password that has an @ sign for an A and a $ for the S. So technically it's still easy to remember. The password was password. It was just, written with different characters so that somebody trying to guess what it was, like an attacker, would make it more difficult for them. Now, the initial password should be created by a security administration or generated by the system itself. And the user should be required to change it on the very first login. Now, I think this is a very important aspect because if I'm the administrator and I create a user account for you and I say, here's your password, you need to go change it, but you don't change it. And then later on, that user does something illegal with that system. Here comes the investigation. And the user says, oh, I didn't do it. And I, would stand up and say, oh, you did too. I saw it was your log. You logged in. And he goes, yeah, but you knew the password. You gave it to me. You could have done it. See, that's a conversation you don't want to have. So even just for liability, right, should be something they're required to change the very first time they log in. You should also consider or take into consideration the account login policies. They should also be used. Now, those policies might be things like in 30 days your password will change. Or if you try to log in 3 times in a row within 5 minutes and you do that unsuccessfully, we're going to lock out the account. Now, another thing you should look at is your passwords should be in a one-way encrypted format stored internally to the computer. Passwords should also make sure that they're never displayed in any form. So if I have something I have to type a password in, what do you see? You see the little dots or little asterisks so that people looking over your shoulder can't see those. Again, they should be changed regularly. They should be changed by the user, not by the administrator. And a user should be getting some sort of notification that their passwords are about to expire so that they'll know that they need to change them.